The courtroom was filled with an uneasy tension, the kind that lingered in the air and made it hard to breathe. I sat at the defendant's table, clutching a stack of documents that now felt meaningless compared to the verbal attacks being thrown at me. Across the room, Melissa, my former best friend, stood confidently, her perfectly tailored suit contrasting with the venomous words that spilled from her lips. "She's an unfit mother," Melissa declared, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "She's reckless, irresponsible, and incapable of providing a stable environment for her daughter." My heart sank with every accusation. I had once trusted Melissa with my deepest fears and dreams. She had been there when my daughter Lily was born, holding my hand through the delivery. How did it come to this? How did she become the one standing there, trying to take my daughter away from me? The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the thick stack of papers Melissa had submitted as evidence. "Ms. Carter," he said, addressing her, "your allegations are serious. Do you have proof to substantiate these claims?" Melissa didn't miss a beat. She flipped open a folder and handed it to her attorney, who then presented it to the judge. "Your Honor, I have detailed logs, photographs, and even witness statements. This child has been subjected to a chaotic and unstable environment under her mother's care." I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but my attorney, Mr. Hargrove, placed a firm hand on my arm, silently reminding me to stay composed. "We'll have our chance," he whispered. The judge reviewed the documents, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Melissa turned to the gallery, where a few mutual acquaintances sat, whispering among themselves. I felt their judgmental eyes piercing through me, as if they'd already decided I was guilty. Melissa's attorney took the floor next, pacing dramatically. "Let's talk about Ms. Rebecca Sullivan," he began, gesturing toward me. "A single mother struggling to make ends meet, working odd jobs, frequently late on bills, and, most concerning of all, unable to provide the consistency and care a child like Lily needs. Your Honor, is this the environment a growing child deserves?" Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Lily was my world. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every dream I put on hold, it was all for her. I worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Sure, we didn't have the luxuries Melissa could provide, but we had love, and that should count for something. Mr. Hargrove finally stood, adjusting his tie before speaking. "Your Honor, if I may, my client has tirelessly worked to provide for her daughter. These allegations are not only unfounded but maliciously exaggerated. We will prove that Miss Sullivan is a loving and capable mother." The judge nodded, signaling him to continue. But before he could, Melissa interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Love isn't enough. Stability is what Lily needs, and Rebecca simply can't provide it." The words cut deep, but it wasn't the first time I'd heard them. Melissa had always criticized my choices, even when we were friends. But this wasn't about her opinions, it was about my daughter, and I wasn't going to let her take Lily from me. The courtroom door creaked open, and a small figure slipped inside. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized her, Lily. She had been waiting outside with my sister, but now, she stood at the back of the room, her big brown eyes scanning the crowd. "Lily?" the bailiff whispered, gesturing for her to stay put. But the judge noticed her too. "Is that your daughter, Miss Sullivan?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice trembling. "Bailiff, escort her to the witness stand," the judge instructed. My stomach churned as Lily walked to the front, her small frame dwarfed by the towering furniture. This wasn't part of the plan. She wasn't supposed to speak. The judge leaned forward, his tone softening. "Young lady, do you know why you're here?" Lily nodded. "I think so," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And do you feel comfortable sharing your thoughts with us today?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "Yes, I do." Melissa smirked, as if she believed Lily's testimony would seal her victory. But I saw something in my daughter's expression, something Melissa hadn't accounted for. The courtroom fell silent as Lily adjusted herself in the witness chair, her feet barely touching the ground. Her small hands gripped the edges of the seat as she glanced at me, then at Melissa. I could see the weight of the moment on her young shoulders, but there was a surprising steadiness in her gaze. The judge leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Lily, I understand this is a difficult situation. Please speak freely. Tell us how you feel living with your mother. Lily's eyes flicked to Melissa, then back to the judge. I love my mom, she began, her voice unwavering. She works really hard for me. She wakes up early to make my breakfast, even when she's really tired. And she never forgets to tell me she loves me before I go to school. I felt a lump form in my throat as Lily's words resonated in the quiet room. Melissa's smirk faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. But Lily, Melissa interjected, standing up abruptly, does your mom ever leave you alone? Do you feel scared sometimes when she's not there? The judge shot Melissa a warning glare. Ms. Carter, you are not permitted to question the witness directly. Melissa sat down, visibly irritated, but the damage was done. Lily hesitated for a moment, fidgeting with her fingers. Sometimes Mom has to work late, she admitted, her voice softer now. But she always calls me, and when she's home we do fun stuff together, like bake cookies or watch movies. I don't feel scared because I know she's doing it for us. Melissa's attorney, clearly sensing an opportunity, rose to speak. Your Honor, while it's admirable that Miss Sullivan tries to balance work and parenting, Lily herself admits to being left alone. That speaks to instability, doesn't it? Before the judge could respond, Lily's voice rang out again, cutting through the tension. I'm not alone, she said, her tone firmer this time. My Aunt Clara is always there with me when Mom's at work. She helps me with my homework and tucks me in at night. Mom always makes sure I'm safe. Melissa's face darkened, but her attorney pressed on, flipping through his notes. Lily, your Aunt Clara isn't your mother. Wouldn't it be better to live in a home where you wouldn't need a babysitter at all? Somewhere stable, like with Miss Carter, who has a large house, plenty of resources, and no need to leave you unattended. Lily looked at the attorney with a mix of confusion and defiance. But I don't want to live anywhere else, she said simply. I want to stay with my mom. She's my family. A big house doesn't make it better. The gallery murmured softly, and even the judge seemed moved by Lily's honesty. Mr. Hargrove took this moment to step forward. Lily, you're a very brave girl to speak here today. Can you tell us how your life feels when you're with your mom? Lily smiled faintly, her face lighting up. It feels happy, she said. Mom always tells me that even if things are hard, we'll get through it together. She makes me feel safe. Melissa, however, wasn't finished. She leaned over and whispered something to her attorney, who stood up again. Your Honor, if I may, it's clear that Lily loves her mother. But love isn't enough. We have evidence that Ms. Sullivan's financial situation is precarious. Her work hours are unpredictable, and her home environment lacks the structure a growing child needs. The judge nodded. Proceed, but keep it concise. The attorney flipped through a document. For example, on multiple occasions, Ms. Sullivan has failed to pay her bills on time, as shown in these records. Additionally, the neighborhood she resides in has a higher-than-average crime rate, which further raises questions about Lily's safety. My hands clenched into fists as I listened to him dissect my life. Yes, I had struggled. Yes, my neighborhood wasn't perfect. But I had never let Lily go without. Mr. Hargrove stood again, addressing the courtroom with calm confidence. Your Honor, struggles are not the same as negligence. Ms. Sullivan has done everything in her power to create a loving, stable environment for her daughter. Furthermore, we have evidence that Ms. Carter's interest in gaining custody may not be as altruistic as it seems. The judge raised an eyebrow. Explain. Mr. Hargrove held up a stack of documents. Ms. Carter's petition for custody is heavily intertwined with her own financial situation. She has repeatedly expressed to mutual acquaintances her desire to gain control of Lily's inheritance from her late grandmother, which is held in a trust until Lily turns 18. We also have witness testimony indicating Ms. Carter's disdain for Ms. Sullivan is personal rather than parental. Melissa's confident facade cracked. That's a lie, she blurted out, standing up. The judge slammed his gavel. Ms. Carter, control yourself, or I'll hold you in contempt. Lily, meanwhile, sat quietly, her face unreadable as the adults around her argued. But I noticed her hands gripping the chair tighter, her knuckles white. Finally, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos. Why are you doing this, Aunt Melissa? Everyone froze. Melissa stared at Lily, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "You were my mom's best friend," Lily continued, her voice trembling but steady. "You said you loved me, so why are you trying to take me away? Don't you want me to be happy?" Melissa's face turned red, and for the first time, she had no answer. The courtroom remained tense as Melissa avoided Lily's gaze, her usual confidence slipping away. The judge tapped his pen thoughtfully on the bench, clearly absorbing Lily's words and the evidence Mr. Hargrove had presented. Melissa's attorney, sensing the shift in momentum, stood again. "Your Honor, while Ms. Carter's motives may be questioned, the fact remains that Ms. Sullivan's financial instability and living conditions are undeniable. Surely, the court must prioritize the child's overall well-being over emotional testimony." I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Yes, I wasn't rich and my neighborhood wasn't pristine, but Lily was happy and loved. Wasn't that what mattered most? Mr. Hargrove, calm as ever, rose to respond. "Your Honor, while financial stability is important, it is not the sole determinant of a child's well-being. Studies and common sense tell us that love, security, and emotional stability are paramount. Ms. Sullivan has provided all of that and more for Lily despite her financial struggles. It's worth noting that Ms. Carter's financial stability doesn't inherently mean a safer or healthier environment for Lily." The judge nodded but didn't give anything away. "Point noted, Mr. Hargrove, but let's focus on facts rather than speculation." Melissa's attorney wasn't finished. "If I may, Your Honor, I would like to submit another piece of evidence. Testimony from Ms. Sullivan's landlord regarding her financial difficulties and the state of her apartment complex." A pit formed in my stomach as a tall man entered the courtroom. My landlord, Mr. Peterson, took the stand, a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "State your name for the record," Melissa's attorney instructed. "James Peterson," he replied, his voice gruff. "And what is your relationship to Ms. Sullivan?" "I'm her landlord. She's been renting a unit from me for about 5 years now." "Can you describe the state of the apartment complex where Ms. Sullivan resides?" Peterson shrugged. "It's not exactly luxury living. The building's old and, well, we've had some issues, plumbing, electrical. But it's what you'd expect for someone on a budget like hers." Melissa's attorney nodded. "And has Ms. Sullivan ever been late on her rent?" Peterson chuckled. "More times than I can count. She always comes up with the money eventually, but it's usually after a lot of excuses." I felt my cheeks burn with shame as he continued. I had always tried my best to pay on time, even if it meant cutting back on groceries or skipping meals. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," the attorney said smugly before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this testimony only reinforces the argument that Ms. Sullivan's financial situation poses a significant risk to Lily's stability and well-being." Mr. Hargrove stood again, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Your Honor, I would like to cross-examine the witness." The judge nodded. "Proceed." "Mr. Peterson," Mr. Hargrove began, "you mentioned that Ms. Sullivan always eventually pays her rent, correct?" "Yes, but—" "Thank you. And has Ms. Sullivan ever caused any disturbances in the complex? Any complaints from neighbors?" Peterson hesitated. "No, not really. In fact, isn't it true that Ms. Sullivan has often made repairs to her own apartment when the management failed to address issues in a timely manner?" Peterson's smirk faltered. "I guess she's done a few things here and there. So, despite the challenges of living in an older building, Ms. Sullivan has demonstrated resourcefulness and responsibility, hasn't she?" Peterson mumbled something unintelligible, clearly annoyed at being backed into a corner. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Mr. Hargrove said, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this testimony only highlights Ms. Sullivan's resilience and dedication to providing a safe and stable home for her daughter under less than ideal circumstances. It does not, in any way, suggest that Lily is in danger or unhappy in her current environment." The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered the arguments. Melissa's attorney looked ready to object, but the judge held up a hand. "We've heard enough from this witness. Mr. Peterson, you may step down." As Peterson left the stand, Melissa's frustration became palpable. She whispered furiously to her attorney, her polished veneer cracking under the pressure. But the moment that followed was one I'll never forget. Lily, still sitting in the witness chair, raised her hand timidly. "Can I say something else?" she asked softly. The judge glanced at her, surprised, but nodded. "Go ahead, Lily." Lily took a deep breath, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. "I know my mom doesn't have a big house or a lot of money," she began, her voice steady. "But she loves me, and she always makes me feel like I'm the most important person in the world. Isn't that what a good mom is supposed to do?" The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of Lily's words hanging in the air. Even Melissa looked momentarily stunned. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Thank you, Lily. Your honesty and bravery are commendable." As Lily stepped down from the witness chair and walked back toward me, I felt an overwhelming surge of pride and love for my daughter. She had spoken her truth, and in that moment, it felt like nothing else mattered. Lily's words hung in the air, touching every corner of the courtroom. Even the judge's usually stoic face softened, though he quickly masked it by jotting something down on his notepad. I reached out and gently pulled Lily into my arms as she returned to her seat beside me. Melissa sat stiffly at her table, the weight of the moment clearly unsettling her. Her attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, but for the first time, she didn't respond. Instead, her gaze was locked on Lily, her expression unreadable. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a brief recess before I announce my decision," he said, rising from his seat. "Court will resume in 15 minutes. As the gavel struck, the tension in the room didn't dissipate. Melissa stood abruptly, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she exited the courtroom. Her attorney followed closely behind, looking just as frazzled. I let out a shaky breath, clutching Lily's hand. "You were so brave up there," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so proud of you." "I just told the truth," Lily replied simply, her innocence shining through. Mr. Hargrove sat down beside us, his calm demeanor reassuring. "That was powerful," he said. "Lily's testimony might have just turned this case around. The judge will consider not only the evidence but also what's in the best interest of the child." And Lily made it clear where her heart is. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Melissa had resources, influence, and a polished narrative. I had love, but would that be enough? As we waited for court to resume, I noticed Melissa re-enter the room. Her composure had returned, but there was something different about her. A flicker of unease in her eyes. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, and whispered to her attorney again. When the judge returned and took his seat, the room fell silent once more. "I've reviewed the arguments, evidence, and testimony presented today," he began, his tone measured. "This case is undeniably complex. On one hand, we have Ms. Carter, who has demonstrated financial stability and a willingness to support Lily. On the other hand, we have Ms. Sullivan, who, despite financial challenges, has provided a loving and supportive environment for her daughter." My heart pounded as the judge's gaze swept across the courtroom, landing briefly on me. "I must consider what is in the best interest of the child," he continued. "It is clear that Lily has a strong bond with her mother, Ms. Sullivan. However, the concerns raised regarding Ms. Sullivan's financial instability cannot be ignored." I felt the blood drain from my face as the judge paused. Was he about to rule in Melissa's favor? "Ms. Carter," the judge said, turning to Melissa, "while your financial stability is commendable, I have concerns about your motives in this case. The evidence presented today suggests that your actions may not have been entirely selfless." Melissa's face flushed, and she straightened in her seat, but she didn't interrupt. "Ms. Sullivan," the judge said, now addressing me, "it is evident that you have done everything in your power to provide for Lily under difficult circumstances. Your daughter's testimony today was particularly compelling and speaks volumes about the strength of your relationship." Tears welled in my eyes as I clung to Lily's hand. "Therefore," the judge concluded, "it is my decision that full custody of Lily will remain with Ms. Sullivan. However, I encourage Ms. Sullivan to seek financial counseling and additional resources to ensure a stable future for her daughter. Ms. Carter, you will be granted supervised visitation rights, contingent upon maintaining a respectful and supportive relationship with both Ms. Sullivan and Lily." A collective exhale swept through the room. Relief washed over me, and I pulled Lily into a tight embrace. "We did it," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Melissa stood abruptly, her face a mask of anger and humiliation. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. I turned to her, meeting her glare head-on. "It is for Lily's sake," I said firmly. Melissa's attorney placed a hand on her arm, muttering something I couldn't hear. She stormed out of the courtroom, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. Mr. Hargrove smiled warmly at me. "Congratulations, Ms. Sullivan. You and Lily deserve this victory." I nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." As I walked out of the courtroom hand in hand with Lily, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and hope. For the first time in months, the future didn't seem so uncertain. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence as the judge finished delivering his initial observations. His words lingered in the air, their implications weighing on everyone in the room. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and hope battling for dominance. Melissa sat with her arms crossed, her polished exterior faltering slightly. Her attorney whispered something in her ear, but she didn't react, her gaze locked on the judge. Meanwhile, I held tightly to Lily's hand, drawing strength from her quiet presence beside me. Before I finalized my decision, the judge began, his tone firm but measured. "I want to address the issue of Lily's well-being. Her testimony today provided valuable insight into the dynamics of her relationship with both her mother and Ms. Carter." Lily squeezed my hand, her small gesture grounding me in the moment. I glanced at her and saw a flicker of bravery in her eyes, a reminder of why I had fought so hard to get to this point. The judge continued, "It is evident that Lily shares a deep emotional bond with her mother, Ms. Sullivan. This bond is a critical factor in determining what is in the best interest of the child. However, the court cannot overlook the financial concerns raised by Ms. Carter." I felt a pang of anxiety as the judge mentioned Melissa's claims. She had painted me as irresponsible, someone incapable of providing for Lily's future. And while I knew that wasn't true, the reality of my financial struggles was undeniable. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, shifting his focus to Melissa, "your commitment to providing a stable environment for Lily is commendable. However, I must question the motivation behind your petition for custody. The evidence presented today suggests that this case may have been driven, at least in part, by personal animosity rather than genuine concern for Lily's welfare." Melissa's expression tightened, her perfectly applied makeup unable to mask her discomfort. She opened her mouth as if to respond but thought better of it, choosing instead to sit in silence. The judge leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Custody battles are not about punishing one parent or rewarding another. They are about ensuring the well-being of the child. And in this case, it is clear that Lily feels safest and most loved in her mother's care." A wave of relief began to wash over me, but the judge wasn't finished. "That being said," he continued, "the court strongly advises Ms. Sullivan to address the financial challenges brought to light during these proceedings. While love and emotional support are paramount, a stable financial environment is equally important for Lily's future. I will be recommending resources and programs to assist Ms. Sullivan in this regard." Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded, grateful for the judge's understanding but acutely aware of the road ahead. "Lastly," the judge said, his voice softening slightly, "I want to commend Lily for her bravery today. It is not easy for a child to speak in court, let alone with such honesty and maturity. Lily, your words have made a difference here." Lily looked up at the judge, her cheeks flushed but her eyes bright. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The judge straightened in his seat. "I will be delivering my final decision shortly. We will recess for 15 minutes. With that, he banged his gavel, signaling a temporary break in the proceedings. As the courtroom began to empty, Melissa shot me a look filled with resentment. Her attorney tried to usher her out of the room, but she paused, her gaze darting to Lily. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something else in her expression. Regret, perhaps, or a glimmer of self-awareness. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. I sat back in my seat, exhaling deeply. Mr. Hargrove placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You've done everything you could," he said. "Now it's up to the judge." I nodded, my grip on Lily's hand never loosening. "No matter what happens," I whispered to her, "we're in this together." She smiled up at me, her innocence a stark contrast to the tension that filled the room. "I know, Mom," she said. "We'll be okay." As we waited for the final decision, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. This was it, the culmination of months of uncertainty, fear, and fighting for what mattered most. Whatever the judge decided, I knew one thing for sure. I had done everything in my power to protect my daughter and keep her by my side. The courtroom buzzed softly as everyone returned from the brief recess. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat, each beat louder than the last. Lily sat beside me, her tiny fingers still curled around mine. Her courage had carried us through the storm, and now we waited for the final verdict. Melissa entered, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She didn't meet my gaze, but her expression was stony, her confidence shaken. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she waved him off, sitting stiffly at her table. "All rise," the bailiff called, and we stood as the judge returned to his seat. His face was unreadable as he shuffled his papers, the weight of the moment hanging heavily over the room. "You may be seated," he said, and we all complied, the silence almost deafening. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "After careful consideration of the evidence, testimonies, and, most importantly, the well-being of the child, I have reached a decision in the matter of Carter versus Sullivan regarding the custody of Lily Sullivan." I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. "Ms. Carter," he began, "while your financial stability and ability to provide a materially comfortable life for Lily are commendable, the court cannot ignore the emotional harm that might arise from separating her from her mother. Custody is not simply about financial advantage. It is about the child's emotional, psychological, and physical well-being." Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line, her carefully composed exterior cracking. "Ms. Sullivan," the judge continued, turning to me, "your financial struggles are a concern, but the bond you share with Lily and the love and care you provide her with are undeniable. It is evident that Lily thrives in your presence, and removing her from that environment would not be in her best interest." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I squeezed Lily's hand, and she smiled up at me, her bravery shining brighter than ever. "Therefore," the judge concluded, his voice firm, "primary custody will remain with Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Carter will be granted supervised visitation rights, with the possibility of reevaluation in 6 months should circumstances change." The gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the hearing. For a moment, I was frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Lily threw her arms around me. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, we did," I replied, holding her close. Melissa stood abruptly, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath, storming out of the courtroom. Her attorney followed, clearly exasperated. Mr. Hargrove shook my hand, his smile genuine. "Congratulations, Ms. Sullivan. You fought for what mattered most, and it paid off." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As we left the courthouse, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for months finally lifted. The sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the stormy battle we had endured inside. Lily looked up at me, her eyes filled with trust and love. "I told the truth, Mom," she said softly. "That's all I could do." "And it was enough," I replied, kissing her forehead. "Because the truth always matters." We walked away from the courthouse hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. The fight had been long and exhausting, but in the end, love had prevailed. Together we were unstoppable.